Hi everyone, this is David, and this is Echoes in Time. Now, before we get started, I wanted to say I know I said in the last video that we were going to talk about torpedoes, but something pretty remarkable has happened to me over the last week and a half that I wanted to share with you guys. Okay, so this is how it started. In January this year, and having shot the 2017 eclipse, I was invited to shoot the 2024 Total Solar Eclipse along with some other photographers at the Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. Now, initially, this seemed like a great idea. The museum is an amazing place. It was right in the path of totality and really only about an hour and a half drive from home, which, when I shot the 2017 eclipse, I shot it from Hopkinsville, Kentucky, which was one of the longest totalities in the country at 2 minutes and 20 seconds. And it was like 375 miles one way. Plus I had to book a hotel room. So, an hour and a half drive from home, it seemed like pretty ideal. But, the more I thought about it, the more I decided that this was probably going to be the last opportunity to do something like this for me. I mean, I'm 60 years old. It won't see the continental United States again for 20 years, and it won't see Ohio again until I think 2099 or something like that. So, no disrespect to my peers, but I really wanted to shoot this, let's call it what it is. It's an amazing celestial event in a way that was different from what everybody else is doing. Now, I understand the eclipse is the eclipse, no matter where you're at shooting it, as long as you're in the path of totality and you have the right camera settings and you do everything that you're supposed to do with solar filters, blah, 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 blah. One is going to look a lot like the others, like the others, like the others. But for me, where I was shooting it was just as important as shooting it itself, So with this in mind, I reached out to a guy named Paul Ferrace. Now, Paul is the president and the captain of the USS Cod Submarine Memorial in Cleveland, Ohio. I've been to the Cod many, many, many times over the last 30 years. I told him what I wanted to do, and I asked his permission to shoot the 2024 eclipse from his boat. I also sent along a link to my portfolio for him to review so, he could see that I was in earnest. I mean, I am a commercial photographer by trade. Paul's answer came very quickly, and he relayed that he thought it was a great idea. He also told me that he had worked as a photographer himself in the past. So there was question number one answered. I had chosen what I believed to be a very unique location. Okay? But now we had about 3 months to get prepared. I needed a lens, I needed a solar filter, I needed a lot of necessary equipment that would allow me to get the best shots that I could. Now, I've done this once before. I knew what I'd gotten wrong the first time and what I wanted to get right this year in 2024. So once all the gear had arrived, I did some practice shots with the sun at the angle that it was going to be at. At that time of day. The totality was going to begin about 3:15 p.m. So many times, I live in southern Ohio, the Cod's in northern Ohio. So I shot many times with the sun angle between 2 o'clock, which is about when first contact starts, and totality, which was about 3:15. The sun will move across the sky its own diameter about once every 4 minutes. So tracking the sun and keeping everything centered in the frame, this was important. What I couldn't do was simulate the eclipse itself. I could get the exposures of the sun right and do some bracket shooting, underexposing, overexposing, and layering them together in Photoshop. But there's no way to simulate totality. So what I did was, on March 25th, there was a full moon. And it rose fairly early in the evening, thankfully. So I got out there during the full moon and I shot some moon pictures. The moon reflects like 18-20% of the light, which is still about 20 times more than what you're going to have during totality. About a week before the eclipse, Paul reached out to me and said that given the unknown traffic situation, they were really expecting the worst. If I wanted to, I could come up on Sunday, the day before the event, park on the inside of the compound and spend the night on the boat because some of the crew were also spending the night. Well, I mean, what do you say to something like that? What do you say when you have such a generous offer to allow you to spend the night on a World War II submarine? It's just not an opportunity that comes along all the time. And I'm like, hell yeah. What else could you possibly say to such an amazing invitation? So I watched the weather closely, and they were calling for partly cloudy. It was the only thing I really felt that could, other than, potentially car trouble, clouding over is the only thing that could have stopped the eclipse for me. Around noon on April 7th, I headed north, and we were looking at probably a 3 to 4 hour drive to Cod. My goal here was to arrive, if possible, before the Cod closed to the public at 5 p.m. I just really didn't want to put anybody out. I mean, they were going to have to unlock the gate to allow my car into the compound. And, the Cod's volunteers and staff and crew, these are amazing folks that work on the Cod. They maintain the submarine, they give tours, they're always helping the visitors, and they deal a lot with the general public. The last thing I wanted was to inconvenience anyone. As it turned out, completely opposite of the way that it was when I did the 2017 eclipse. Traffic was actually very light. And I got to the Cod in probably a little over 3 hours. So I managed to pull in right about 4 p.m. I got the car parked inside the compound, and now it came to unloading my gear. I had, my overnight bag and 2 bags of camera equipment, tripods. There was a lot of stuff that had to come off the boat, or had to come out of the trunk. So now, Cod is unique in many ways to any of her sister submarines that are on display. And I'll explain. I have been on quite a number of submarines of World War II vintage. Clamagore, Cobia, I'm not sure exactly how it's pronounced, in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. The Pampanito out in San Francisco, I was on her several times while I was out there. So I've been on Cod probably 24 times over the last 30 years. So, but one thing that is unique about Cod from her sister subs is her sister subs have had the front and rear hatches removed. They were cut out of the hull, and staircases were put in with, I'm sure there's probably, I can't honestly remember, but I'm pretty sure there's like locking doors or something on there at night so they can secure the sub. Cod still has all of her original hatches. So when you go into the boat, you start in the forward torpedo room, you go into the escape trunk, you go down all the original ladders and everything that the crew used during the Second World War and after, when Cod functioned as a training sub. To me, this lends a certain level of authenticity to the experience that you really don't get on the other ones. However, it does kind of have the detrimental effect that those who might have mobility issues would. I mean, I'm only 60, and those hatches can be a little bit challenging even for me. And there were several times during the course of my stay up there that I stood at the bottom of the hatch going into the forward torpedo room and helped a few people down the ladders and stuff. But still, personally, I wouldn't have it any other way. I think it's fantastic. And it's just a unique experience. So now, to get my 50 plus pounds of camera gear below deck for the night, one of Cod's crewmen, David, he retrieved a rope from the maintenance locker, and we lowered my bags down through the hatches one at a time. The hatches, while are perfectly accommodating for a human being, trying to go down carrying, 1 or even 2 large camera bags, it would have been challenging at best. So now I decided that they told me I could stay anywhere that I wanted to stay on the boat, with the exception of the captain's cabin. Now, I opted to stay in crew berthing, and the mattresses were actually quite comfortable, but I'll be honest with you, I hardly slept all night. The anticipation of what was coming the next day and the knowledge that I was only going to get one shot at this, I just couldn't quiet my mind. You know, I was constantly going over the different things that I wanted to do. So I was up before dawn, which is not terribly unusual for me, but I was sitting on the deck of a World War II submarine, drinking coffee out of my thermos and watching the sun come up. I mean, honestly, could it really get any better than that? So I spent most of the day of April 8th getting to know some of the Cod's crew, talking to visitors. I was even permitted access to the conning tower to take photos. Now, this is generally off limits to visitors for a variety of reasons, but one may be that the Cod has, really as far as I know, the only working Mark IV Mod 1 torpedo data computer in the world. So there's a number of relics up there that they probably would feel more comfortable that the general public not interact with. For me, I found ascending the ladder to the conning tower with 2 cameras around my neck to be challenging at best. But I would do it again a dozen times over if I could. And of course, you know, you can't help but take the obligatory selfie. At around 1:30 p.m., I began to set up my gear. With the captain's permission, of course, I mounted a 4K action camera on the railing of the aft 40mm Bofor pointing towards the 5-inch deck gun. I mounted another on the railing after the deck gun, pointing towards it. Now, there's a reason for this, and I'll explain in a second. These action cameras, these 2 cameras, they'll be running on automatic. And the purpose is that the crew of the Cod was going to fire her 5-inch deck gun at the start of and the end of the eclipse, of the totality. And I wanted to try to get it on video. Especially, I was really hoping to get the flare of the muzzle as the gun goes off. So I set up my main DSLR camera that I would be shooting the eclipse with on a tripod down on the lawn next to Big Henry where the practice torpedo and stuff is. And I wanted it back out of the way of visitors. I didn't want to do anything to impede on those who were actually visiting the boat. If you're interested in how I shot these, leave me a comment below and I'll do the best I can to answer your questions. So I had another DSLR, one I've labeled as number 2, set up to record HD video on a tripod with a shotgun microphone pointed back towards the submarine. So you've got one on the aft gun platform, you've got one behind the 5-inch deck gun, and you've got one on the lawn pointing towards the submarine. And I have the one that's pointed at the sun at the eclipse itself. Lastly, I had a 5th and final camera I would be shooting handheld for any photos of opportunity that might come along. And you'll see here in a minute, there was definitely some photos of opportunity that came along. This was an ambitious plan. One, I got to be honest with you, quite frankly, I wasn't sure was even going to work. This was a lot. This really was a lot. 5 cameras to keep track of and still take time to enjoy the eclipse itself. So I put my solar filter on the one focused for my main camera, which was going to photograph the eclipse that was pointing towards the sun, roughly around 2 p.m. And I wanted to get the focus and everything locked in as the moon made its transit from first contact to second contact, as the moon made its transit across the sun. There was a slight breeze and a haze of clouds, and considering we had a less than 50% chance of clear skies, I'm pretty happy. But it's not enough that you couldn't see through them, but it was just enough to keep the images from being quite as sharp as I would have liked. In Hopkinsville in 2017, we had a lot of cloud cover, but about a half an hour or so before totality, everything opened up and it was clear skies. But see, that was August, and this is April. So, as you know, April tends to be a rainy and cloudy time of year. So, all in all, I was happy with the results, and I continued to take photos as the moon made its way in front of the sun towards totality. So, about 30 minutes before the event, I climbed back up on board the sub, and I started the action cameras recording. I knew that as we got closer to totality, I wasn't going to be able to just stop and run up there, because you literally have to climb up onto the after gun deck in order to start the cameras. So, and I knew that the batteries in the action cameras, I've used them many times before, that they would last about an hour, which was, probably twice as long as I was going to need. So I just had to hope they would get some good footage. I left them running on automatic, so I really didn't know what it was going to look like. About 5 minutes before totality, I started recording with my Canon DSLR that was on the tripod facing the sub. I made one final check of the camera pointing towards the eclipse, and then I got ready for the big show. Now, as I said before, this was not my first eclipse. I knew full well what to expect the last time in 2017, and though we only had 2 minutes of 20 seconds of totality, this one was going to be a lot different. For this one in 2024, I'd have 3 minutes and 49 seconds to keep my camera aligned and also to get as many handheld shots of the event as I could. Also, the captain informed me that they would be firing the deck gun, as I said, at the beginning and the end of totality. So, I had all these different things going on. I really was hoping that the muzzle flash would show up. So, right on cue, the darkness began as Luna made her way across the sun. I pulled the solar filter off the lens just in time to capture what is known as the diamond ring effect. Now, this effect only really lasts it usually comes out within the last 15 seconds prior to totality, but the diamond ring itself only lasts about 5 or 6 seconds. So, yanking that off and getting those images, you want to try to get them in various exposure settings so that you get the best possible image. The temperature dropped. It was so funny because you could actually feel how much cooler it got. It was probably 10 degrees, and it got dark, not like night, but really like a very late dusk. And right on cue, Cod's 5-inch wet mount deck gun sounded the beginning of totality. I had started an intervalometer, which was hanging on the side of my camera pointing towards the eclipse, and I just let the camera run. I knew that it was going to be taking 7 continuous shots, and I had set it up bracketed so that it would take 3 that were 3 stops underexposed and 3 that were 3 stops overexposed and 1 that was perfectly exposed. So I had all of that set up, and I just let the intervalometer run. With the sun moving its own diameter once every 4 minutes, it would still stay pretty close to the middle of the frame. So I grabbed my handheld and I said, okay, now I want to get some shots of opportunity. And that was when I looked over to see the submarine, and you could see only the silhouettes of those on board looking up at totality. The sky in the background was red at the waterline. Like the sunset on the horizon, that it slowly faded to a haze gray and then a deep blue. And to the right of totality, you could easily make out Venus in the darkness, shining just as bright as can be. There was actually an audible gasp from the crowd. Now, I had heard this before, and that was one of the reasons I wanted the camera down on the ground next to me running, recording HD video. Because on the last event, it was like a wave went up everywhere. But at that time, I was in a sea of hundreds of people. This time, there was probably 30 or 40 people sitting at the picnic tables watching totality. The crew, or the visitors, were just amazed. So for the last minute or so, I put everything aside. The intervalometer was controlling the shutter on the Eclipse camera. It was busy clicking away. So I took the time to just watch totality with my own eyes. I knew that it was something that I was really never going to see again. And it really is a remarkable celestial event. And it only works because the moon, our moon, is 1/400th the size of our sun, but it's almost exactly 400 times closer to Earth. There's nowhere else in the known universe that this happens. And it only happens in such a way on the Earth about every 18 months. And in this area, hundreds of years can honestly go by before we ever see another total eclipse. So, and then it seemed like no more than a minute and it was over. Cod's gun reported the end of totality. I slapped the solar filter back on the lens, stopped the intervalometer, and took a few more shots. Over the next hour, the moon moved off across the face of the sun, and what is likely the last eclipse that I would ever see. People lined up to look at the photos on the back of my camera, and as we scrolled through them, they took the occasional cell phone shot of the back of the screen, especially of the diamond ring. The diamond ring really came out fantastic. I'm so very happy. It's right here on my wall. So all that was left now was for me to pack up my gear and begin the 3 to 4 hour drive home. And just before I did, Captain Frace invited me to fire the deck gun. I mean, could the day really get any better?
Ready? Fire! Down, and when I step away, I'll say fire at will. Okay, ready? Ready? Fire!
So I turned the video cameras on the deck back on, and I waited to instructions. And when instructed, I hit the button, and Cod's gun reported one last time for this total solar eclipse. The reverberation was amazing. When you watch it on the video, you'll even see that it shook the cameras a little bit. So I spent the next hour and a half packing up my gear, loading my car, saying goodbye to everyone for now. And obviously I will be back at the very, very next opportunity that I get. The last 36 hours had been filled with, really good weather, new friends, lifelong experiences. If you have the chance, don't wait for the next eclipse to visit a museum ship near you. It doesn't matter whether there's the Carrier at Patriots Point, Yorktown, there's Pampanito in San Francisco, there's the Kid in Baton Rouge, there's the Texas down somewhere in Texas, I don't know where it's at now, there's Buffalo Naval Yard, there's New Jersey when the New Jersey comes out of dry dock, there's just museum ships everywhere, and they're just an amazing time. It's just an amazing thing to see. So anyway, I wanted to reach out and give a special thank you to Paul and the crew of the USS Cod who made this trip for me and these images possible. If it had not been for them, yes, I would have still enjoyed the eclipse. Yes, I would have still taken images at a place that I love. The National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio is fabulous. But I was the only one there. And it was such a unique and wonderful experience. I don't really have the words to describe how grateful I am. So again, if you have any questions, please put them in the comments section below. I'll do my very, very best to answer them, and we'll get this loaded up, and I hope you all enjoy it. For Echoes in Time, I'm David Brown. Thank you so much for watching.